It was a date that would live in infamy, a surprise attack upon a major port by the Imperial Japanese Navy before a formal declaration of war was made. The admiral of the combined fleet would become a legend, commencing a war that would captivate naval historians worldwide ever since. Japan awoke a sleeping giant, challenging a nation many times her size and her strength. The balance of power in Asia would never be the same again. We are, of course, talking about the surprise attack on Port Arthur. Welcome to the first episode of our new series on the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905. During the mid-16th century, a shaky relationship emerged between the empires of Russia and Japan, as both powers sought to expand their power and influence over an overlapping region of East Asia. During the Second Opium War of 1856 to 1860, Russia acquired the cold water port of Vladivostok from the Qing dynasty. In 1861, they attempted to establish a year-round anchorage on the island of Tsushima. This encroachment on Japanese soil led to a clash between Russian sailors and some samurai and Japanese farmers, prompting the Japanese to ask Britain to help rid the island of the Russians. By the 1890s, Russia would go on to build the Trans-Siberian Railway, linking the empire's easternmost port of Vladivostok to the rest of Russia. This new infrastructure allowed Russia to cast her ambitions of territorial expansion onto the Qing dynasty region of Manchuria, a territory Japan also sought. During the First Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to 1895, Russia supported a coup in Korea, helping eliminate the Japanese-backed government in the country. Then, after winning the war against China, Japan was forced to give up her acquisition of the Liaodong Peninsula by the triple intervention of Germany, France, and Russia. Russia followed this by leasing the warm water Port Arthur in 1897 and occupying the Liaodong Peninsula for itself. Then Russia began building the Eastern Chinese Railway and anchored its Russian Pacific Fleet at Port Arthur. Japan felt cheated and viewed Russia's encroachments in Manchuria and in the Yellow Sea as a threat both to its imperial ambitions and national security. In 1899, an insurrection erupted in China when the Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists, known to the West as the Boxers, sought to throw off the growing Euro-colonial influence in the Middle Kingdom. During this war, the titular Boxers attacked the Chinese Eastern Railway, prompting Russia to invade Manchuria to protect its railroads and to relieve the siege of Harbin. This effectively turned Mukden into a Russian stronghold, greatly concerning the Japanese. Japan and all the other members of the Eight-Nation Alliance, which had assembled to put down the Boxers, called upon Russia to withdraw, and Russia gave assurances she would after the Boxer Rebellion had concluded. In April of 1902, Russia publicly agreed to a three-stage withdrawal of her Manchurian forces to occur by the end of 1903. However, Russian War Minister Kuropatkin only approved the first two stages, opposing the third, on the grounds that forces were still required to guard the railways. Thus, instead of pulling out, on May 15th of 1903, Tsar Nicholas II ordered the exclusion of foreign influence from Manchuria, and Viceroy Alexeyev deployed even more forces along the Manchuria-Korea border. Japan viewed all these actions as provocative and strategically threatening, but as pointed out by statesmen like Ito Hirobumi, Japan was too weak to evict the Russians from Manchuria at the time. Japan and Britain signed the Anglo-Japanese Alliance of 1902 as a means to thwart Russia's encroachment. Per the terms of this treaty, Britain was bound to go to war on Japan's side only if another country joined Russia in initiating a war against Japan. In both Russia and Japan, leaders were divided into hawks and doves, but it was Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany who began rattling the swords of war. Wilhelm sought to change the balance of power in Europe to Germany's benefit, and began a propaganda campaign using the Yellow Peril ideology. The Yellow Peril was a racialized fear that all of Asia would unite to enslave the West. Wilhelm perpetuated the idea that the Japanese would soon lead a pan-Asian military to invade Europe, and that only Russia could stop them. Wilhelm sent letters to his cousin Tsar Nicholas II, proclaiming him the savior of the white race, and that God himself chose the Tsar to defend Europe against the Asian threat. In reality, the Kaiser was egging his cousin to go to war with Japan because his goal was to challenge Britain's leading position as the world's mightiest colonial empire. Britain was allied with Japan, and Germany sought a Russo-Germanic alliance against her. The focus was not on Britain alone. Despite the Franco-Russian alliance of 1894, France did not support Russian expansion into Asia. In 1897, French Premier Maurice Rouvier publicly stated that the alliance applied only in Europe and not in Asia, leading Germany to believe that she might break the alliance and steal France's place as Russia's premier continental ally. Wilhelm kept up the pressure, writing to Nicholas II, "Japan is becoming a rather restless customer. It is evident in every unbiased mind that Korea must and will be Russian." This emboldened Nicholas II to believe that Germany would back them up should war occur. Russia's refusal to withdraw from Manchuria galvanized the Japanese. Several meetings between the IJA and IJN occurred in May of 1903, concluding that Russia's encroachment had to stop. On June 23rd, Emperor Meiji agreed that, if necessary, Japan would go to war with Russia. Statesman Ito Hirobumi strongly opposed the war and made a last-ditch effort to prevent it by proposing a deal to Russia on August 3rd of 1903, ceding Manchuria to Tsar Nicholas if Tsar Nicholas would cede Korea to Japan. On October 3rd, Russian Foreign Minister to Japan, Roman Rosen, sent a counter-proposal. Japan would cede Manchuria to Russia. Both would mutually respect the territorial integrity of the Korean Empire, recognize Russian special interests in Korea, and make the 39th parallel a neutral buffer zone. This counter-proposal was a slap in the face. Negotiations would continue until 1904, but eventually Japan would realize Russia was waffling just to buy time to build up its Far Eastern forces. At the beginning of 1904, the Japanese military estimated that it outnumbered the Russians in the Far East by 156 infantry battalions against 100, and 106 artillery batteries against 30, though the Russians had 75 cavalry squadrons against Japan's 54. Moreover, Russia's ability to reinforce its troops was far greater than Japan's, so if war was to occur, the sooner the better. On February 1st, Field Marshal Iwao Oyama appealed to Emperor Meiji for permission to go to war, permission which was granted the very next day. The mood amongst the Japanese leadership was defiant and alarmed. If Russia was not stopped in Manchuria, Korea would be taken, threatening the very existence of the Japanese Empire itself. As a further measure before the outbreak of hostilities, the Japanese government began cultivating a relationship with American President Theodore Roosevelt to ensure that, as an international mediator in world conflicts, he would weigh in their advantage at an appropriate point in the upcoming war. In 1904, Japan's population was 46.5 million, while Russia's was 130 million. The Russian military saw the Japanese as little people who lived in paper houses and wasted hours on flower arrangement and tea ceremonies. However, when the Russian Minister of War Kuropatkin visited Japan in 1903, he was impressed by their infantry and artillery, stating that they were equal to any European army, and advocated avoiding war with them. Russia's navy was much larger than Japan's, but divided between the Baltic, Black and Pacific, whereas Japan's was concentrated in her home waters. By 1902, Russia began strengthening its Pacific Squadron, and by the end of 1903 had 7 battleships, 7 cruisers, 25 destroyers, and 27 smaller ships. The Imperial Japanese Navy consisted of 6 battleships, 10 cruisers, 40 destroyers, and 40 smaller vessels, but they were superior in build to their Russian counterparts. The Russian ships were a hodgepodge of differing types, armaments, and speeds, with a varied amount of armor protection, while the Japanese ships were nearly all British-built, and therefore more uniform and faster than their opponents. Moreover, alcoholism and a general lack of discipline amongst Russian crews was a serious problem. To further compound Russia's naval liabilities, her Baltic crews spent the 6 months of winter ashore because the Gulf of Finland froze over. Because of the bureaucratic demand for uniformity, Russian sailors stationed on the warmer Black Sea also spent an equal amount of months grounded. Thus, Russian sailors spent less time at sea and less time training than their Japanese counterparts. Indeed, under British instruction, the Japanese Navy spent more time at sea and trained intensively. Additionally, Japanese sailors were literate, while most Russian sailors were not. The IJN Combined Fleet was led by Vice Admiral Heihachiro Togo. Admiral Oskar Ludwig Stark administered the two divided squadrons of the Russian Pacific Fleet. The main Russian squadron was in Port Arthur, and the other cruiser squadron was at Vladivostok, under the command of Admiral Nikolai Skridlov. On January 16th of 1904, Emperor Meiji tried a last-ditch effort for peace, sending a note verbale to Russia requesting the resumption of negotiations, but it was completely ignored. Japan officially decided on war on February 4th and severed diplomatic relations on February 6, 1904. The Japanese were aware that the Baltic Fleet, led by Admiral Zinovy Petrovich Rozhdestvensky, was sailing east to reinforce the Pacific. Thus, they needed to destroy the divided Russian Pacific Fleet before this could occur. The IJN chose the East Asia Squadron at Port Arthur as their first target of war, for once it was disabled, the Imperial Japanese Army would have safe passage onto mainland Asia. Japan held another advantage over the Russians, an intricate spy network run by Baron Akashi Motojiro. He was sent as a roaming military attaché all over Europe. By 1902, he moved to St. Petersburg, set up a network using locally based Japanese merchants, workers, and others sympathetic to Japan. He gathered valuable information on troop movements and naval development, and began to support Russian extremists such as Litvinov, Orlovsky, and Lenin to undermine Tsarist rule. It is alleged he recruited the famous spy Sidney Riley, who went to Manchuria and Port Arthur, secretly gathering intelligence, and, if it is to be believed, alongside his acquaintance Hu Liangsheng, stole the Port Arthur harbour defence plans and sold it to the IJN. Allegedly, Vice Admiral Togo was given some false information from Riley and other spies around Port Arthur about the garrison there being on full alert. This led him not to want to risk his capital ships against a well-prepared enemy. Thus, he elected to send a destroyer force to surprise attack Port Arthur. Togo, aboard his flagship Mikasa, set out on February the 6th, leading the 1st and 2nd Divisions out of Sasebo Harbour. The fleet proceeded southeast of Round Island by 6 PM, where Togo dispatched his destroyer force into two attack squadrons, one to attack Port Arthur and the other Dalny. In anticipation of an attack, Admiral Stark had ordered two destroyers to patrol outside the harbour and provide early warning of Japanese ships approaching from the open water. Additionally, two cruisers were ordered to sweep the harbour entrance with searchlights, and all ships were to put out anti-torpedo nets and be prepared for action. However, several ships did not carry out these orders or take the situation seriously. Many main battery guns were unloaded, many nets uncast, entire crews lay asleep in hammocks, and the two patrolling destroyers were told not to fire if they saw anything, but instead to report it to the CIC. This was because the Tsar had instructed his Far Eastern forces, for political reasons, that if war should occur, Japan must be seen to have started it. Alongside this, the majority of the officer corps was celebrating on the shore and at a party hosted by Admiral Stark for his wife's birthday on the deck of his flagship, the Petropavlovsk. The celebrating crowd would, in fact, mistake explosions for cannon salutes for her birthday party. Using stern lights, the Japanese 1st Squadron went towards Liaotichan, allegedly using stolen plans from Sidney Riley to navigate through the Russian minefield protecting the harbour. At 10:50 PM, the 1st Flotilla came across the two Russian destroyers on patrol, prompting the 1st Squadron to douse their lights and slip right past. During this process, the Japanese destroyer Oboro collided with the Ikuzuchi, disabling her and blocking the path of the Inazuma. This led the flotillas to act independently, with the Inazuma becoming lost and the Oboro limping slowly. 20 minutes after midnight, the first flotilla arrived, seeing Russian searchlights. The Shirakumo fired the first 2 torpedoes, followed by 2 from the Asashio. An explosion from the Pallada sounded the alarm to the Russians, who began firing madly. The Kasumi then fired 2 torpedoes, followed by the Akatsuki likewise. The Ikuzuchi, acting alone, came to the scene and fired a single torpedo as they all fled south. The 3rd Japanese flotilla, while en route, saw lights approaching them and stopped their engines, but it turned out to be the Inazuma requesting to join them. They continued, finding the Russian ships firing in disarray. The Usugumo fired first, followed by the Shinonome and the Inazuma, before they all departed south. The Sazanami had been separated from the others since 11 PM, but managed to slip past the 2 Russian destroyers and at 1:25 AM fired a single torpedo before fleeing south. The last ship, the damaged Oboro, attempted to repair herself before creeping towards the enemy by 1:45 AM, when she fired a torpedo and also departed south. On the Russian side, the Cesarevich's steering gear was hit. The Pallada took a torpedo hit amidship, catching fire and keeling over, while the Retvizan took a hit below her bow waterline. The Russians were completely unprepared and could not effectively fire back, with only the Norvik giving chase to the enemy. Out of 16 torpedoes fired, only 3 had hit targets. Following the attack at 8 AM, Togo dispatched Vice Admiral Dewa Shigito with 4 cruisers to investigate Port Arthur and, if possible, lure them out south of Encounter Rock. At 9 AM, Dewa observed 9 Russian ships getting ready to put out to sea, with 3 listing or run aground. The smaller vessels outside the harbour looked to be in disarray, and as Dewa approached 7,500 yards, none were firing upon him. He wireless messaged Togo that the Russians seemed paralysed and the time was ripe to attack. Togo wanted to lure the Russians away from Port Arthur's shore batteries, but the report prompted him to instead order an immediate attack into the heart of the harbour. The combined Japanese fleet approached the harbour, and at 11:55 AM, within a range of 8,500 meters of the enemy, the Mikasa fired the first salvo using her forward 12-inch gun. The Russian ships and shore batteries immediately responded. After the Mikasa, the firing order was Asahi, Fuji, Yashima, Shikishima, and Hatsusei. The 2nd and 3rd divisions followed behind, starting a major barroom brawl, and the shooting was poor on both sides. The Askold, Diana, Petropavlovsk, Poltava, and Norvik were severely damaged. After the first 5 minutes of dueling, the Mikasa was hit by a 10-inch shell hitting her starboard side, which ricocheted and exploded under her mainmast. Her chief engineer, staff officer, paymaster, midshipman, and 3 crew members were wounded, and part of her aft bridge was carried away. The Fuji received a shell through her forward casing, smashing a stack and exploding, killing a turret officer and wounding many. By 12:20, Admiral Togo realized that Dewa was incorrect in his assessment. The enemy was not paralyzed, thus he motioned the fleet to withdraw. This maneuver exposed his entire fleet to the full brunt of the Russian shore batteries. The Hatsusei, Fuji, Shikishima, and Mikasa would take the lion's share of the damage. As the fleet made its turning point, the IJN cruisers took several hits, and the Novik pursued them within 3,300 yards, prompting the IJN cruisers to launch a torpedo salvo. The Novik evaded the torpedoes, but took several salvos below her waterline. Togo's force made its way to Chemulpo harbour, rendezvousing with the IJN's 4th Division, which had neutralised the harbour and landed 4 battalions of the IJA's 12th Division. Casualties lay at 150 Russians and 90 Japanese, with no ships sunk on either side, but many severely damaged. The Japanese were able to quickly repair their ships, while the Russians were unable to do the same with Port Arthur's limited capabilities, for they were blockaded and soon to be under siege over land and sea. Japan issued the formal declaration of war on February 8th of 1904, 3 hours after the surprise attack on Port Arthur. The surprise attack attracted no disapproval abroad. In fact, most Western countries' press presented the Japanese struggle against the Russians as that of David against Goliath. Soon the bear would tumble before a rising sun. This is episode 1 of our member and Patreon exclusive series on the Russo-Japanese War. In total, our kind members and patrons got 9 episodes on this topic, including the famous battles of the Yalu River, Mukden, Luoyang, Tsushima, and much more. Their support allows us to continue creating videos and paying living wages to our team in a YouTube space where ad revenue is extremely volatile. If you want to see the rest of the series on the Russo-Japanese War, as well as more than 160 other exclusive videos, including ones on the Spanish War of Succession, Punic Wars, Pacific War, and more, as well as get access to our exclusive Discord, see our schedule, and get early access to all videos, join the ranks of our patrons and YouTube members via the links in the description and pinned comment. Thanks to our supporters for allowing us to continue doing our dream job. Our videos would be impossible to produce without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links down in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.